there, folks, and welcome to the stream. My name is Mike D'Angelo, aka That Tellest Guy, and I am joined by my wheezy wife, Rihanna.
Was the wheeze captured? I didn't know.
No, I think you managed to get the wheeze out before the recording stream came on.
Oopsies. I'm asthmatic. Leave me alone.
That's love. It's love. It's an empathetic mockery.
It ain't easy being wheezy.
So today's Talking Tellest, we decided, Rihanna and I do this thing where we what if a lot of situations in the Tellest universe, and we kind of had the idea to what if today's episode, which is going to be about a day in the life of someone who lives in Tellest. When we were doing the Talking Tellest episode, where we were trying to figure out like things that we would talk about in future installments of the show, that was one of the things that we were interested in talking about was, what does it look like to be, the common person or the common family in the Tellest universe. Obviously, it's going to be, different situations for different people, and we're going to do different what ifs throughout our lives.
But not every story has to be a hero's journey. What if you just have a suburbanite that just kind of wants to chill, go to work, go home? Like, what does their life look like? And I think it would be a fun way for us to inform like the cozy fantasy genre when we think about like what amenities someone has available, or what do non-magical versus magical folk have available to them.
Right. So in a way, Rihanna and I concocted a story in one afternoon about a family that kind of fits all of those bubbles. Like they check all those boxes. So we were thinking of something that lives outside of Atalatha, which is the main town that you see in the Tellest universe, or one of the main towns. Thistleton is the village that we're thinking of that's suburban to Atalatha. And what we mean by that is kind of like, we live in, the Philadelphia area, but we're in the suburbs of Philly. Like, we can get there in a half an hour by car.
If there's no traffic.
Right.
So that's kind of where we're thinking, like...
Yeah, they're probably a little bit closer to Atalatha proper than we are to Philly proper, as far as, geography goes. But because of a lack of automobiles, they have to do things a little closer anyway.
Yeah, and I would imagine
Exactly.
I would imagine that in city life is going to be a little bit more cramped, a little more busy, like... But if you're in the outskirts, it's not so rural that, like, you have, like, tons and tons of farmland, but it's green enough to where you have, like, a yard, a place for your horses that's not, like, a city stable.
Right, yeah, it's not like living in, like, a hovel that's the equivalent of, like, a townhouse in a city where you've got, a foot of land between your house and the next house, if that. You're not just living in your little cage trying to live life. You've at least got a little bit room to move around. You might not have like a fenced in property or anything like that in the Tellest universe or anything like that, but you do have, a little bit of room to roam.
Fences maybe would be reserved for like the in-city folk who are trying to preserve like their patch of property.
And I mean, I guess it depends on how wealthy you are, how skilled you are with whatever trades you're in, what friends you have.
But maybe if there was like livestock or something, you would have little mini fences, not like a white picket fence.
Right, and that's very likely one of the things that someone in a suburban lifestyle would have in the Tellest universe, is you would be raising livestock to sell to the city. It's not as easy as having like a mega farm like we have in real life, but you would be able to
chickens for eggs, because eggs are so expensive.
Right. They've got the avian flu.
We don't want that.
So let's you did a decent amount of research into this particular family, and we had decided this family kind of went through a couple of phases as we were putting things together, because as Rihanna said, we're not trying to look at like the hero of the day story. We're looking at a more humdrum little
regular traditional thing, because Tellest has an interesting juxtaposition, like a lot of fantasies have, but in this one in particular, you have kind of a blend of like that medieval culture with like a little bit of industry because of like the steampunk kind of things on the rise, but I don't think like they're advanced enough to have a clock, but not like
we have a picture for
yeah.
Bink.
There's a clock. But not so advanced that they have automobiles or like machine guns or anything like that.
Right. There's no as of this point in the Tellest universe where we've been writing, where like the 23 books have been released or whatever, there has yet to be a canon or anything like that. Sometimes in the maps we see it, but that could be argued that that's a couple of years in the future once the age of gunpowder has arrived.
Right.
And we've seen, like, in the big trilogy before the Tales of Tellus came out, they discovered, quote-unquote, dragon dust, which was gunpowder in an ancient text, which was just a marble composition notebook.
I like it.
So it is out there. It's about to happen. It's about to be like the ultimate game changer as of, all right, this person has the ability to cast fire from their hands. So do I.
Right. So what does it look like before it becomes a capitalist hellscape? All right. So the family that we concocted to be sort of emblematic of what the average everyman's family would be the Everly family.
The Everly family.
So we're going to say they have a dad, Albert, who's around 40 years old. They have a mom, Eleanor, who's 36 roughly. So we're talking like what millennials would be in this age, basically.
And the reason that we chose that was because, at least from the perspective that Rhiannon and I are coming from, that is, number one, it's the things that we can empathize with the most. And as we start to age out a lot of the boomers, that's going to be, like the most popular age range. It's going to be the ones that, are the most represented in the, the real world. So it'll be interesting to see kind of ideas thrown about in the Tellest universe that way as well.
Right. So we have Albert and Eleanor, and then they have two children. A daughter named Norma, who's 15 years old, give or take. And we have their son, Wesley. Now, Wesley, we've decided, is going to have magical abilities, but he's born into a non-magical family.
Right.
So, being close to Atalatha, what does that look like?
Right, because the whole concept is some people in the Tellest universe have the strain. Some people just have magical acuity. He's able to tap into, whatever's on the other side, which is, the arcane, elements and stuff like that. So we've talked about in a previous episode that there's something called the Academy of Atalatha, which is where people can, learn to use their magical abilities, whether they're born with the strain or if they're trying to just learn the arcane. And in the case of this family, for years and years, they've been thought to be just this normal family.
Normal
we're just going to go about our business. And, Norma was normal. Is that why you chose Norma?
That's exactly why.
Yeah, that's why I chose it.
There's one more family member. They have a dog named Duke of Barconia. Wesley named him.
Of course. So when Wesley starts to develop these powers, they think, well, there's probably a couple of things that they originally thought. They probably thought, oh no, this is too much. Let's try and diminish this briefly. Before they thought, no, we have to embrace this. Like, this is something, special. We can't, mute this for this. Plus, we live next to Atalatha. Like, Atalatha is the most open when it comes to magical abilities, powers, and everything like that. To some extent, even though they might not think of him as, like, the next hero or anything like that, everybody is kind of given that, like, heroic, like, okay, like, there's a lot that you have to offer to society. And honestly, whether or not you have magical abilities in Atalatha.
So I would imagine they would go through what somebody in, like, our shoes would go to if they had, like, a child that was gifted in some way, like a, somebody that they expected to go to a village school, but they're like, crap, now we need to send them to like a magic school.
Right.
What does that mean for us?
Right. Does it cost more? Is the commute going to completely kill us? Like, what does it look like? And we specifically thought of things in the way of like, what kind of hurdles and obstacles does it provide in the real world, and how does that translate to the Tellest universe?
Right.
So one of the other things that we kind of discussed, and you'll see this in real life too, is an older sibling who might not have anything quote unquote special about them. Like they're doing things day by day. They don't get any special attention. All of a sudden, the younger sibling gets a lot of that kind of weight and attention put on them, and all of a sudden, the older sibling fades into the shadows.
Right. Or they have to, in this scenario, like, still do their chores, still do everything while the child
pick up even more, possibly, because, hey, like, one of us is bringing this child to Atalatha proper,
Yeah.
What do we end up doing now? Like,
Right.
It could be that this family was completely without transportation. They would just, hoof it anywhere. Now they've had to spend money to get a carriage. They have a horse that they have to worry about now. They're not necessarily well-to-do or anything, but all of a sudden it looks like they might be a little bit more well-off. Are they at risk of bandits? Or are they
putting what do they call it? Like dance momming their child to be like, you're gonna make us a lot of money.
Right. If he's got magical abilities, what is he doing with those abilities? How did he find out about the abilities?
Right.
Like, was he just studying, or did he have,
was it a whoopsie?
Yeah, did he coincidentally tap into that arcane font and do something with it?
Did he make Duke of Barconia talk? Is the question. So
He's just the master of ventriloquism, and
I love it.
His parents think that they made him talk.
Right. So let's dial it back a little bit and talk about like the homestead, like where they would what an average house in Tellest would be like. So we already said they have a little bit of like that Victorian flair and a little bit of the medieval flair. So maybe go to the D. April's Fools picture.
The cover?
Yeah, like the tavern look to it, because that'll kind of give you an interior kind of idea. Even though that's a bar. So we would imagine that they have like a typical house in terms of like glass windows, stone and wood, like masonry,
right,
to hold it up. Thatched roofs, or is that a little bit too medieval?
No, I think a thatched roof is fine.
Okay.
I think
like reinforced with wood shingles of some kind.
I think it probably depends on where you're at in the world and how quickly you can get support for things like glass windows. Kev and I have been doing Avatar State Radio, which is our Avatar: The Last Airbender based podcast, and one of the things that we've talked about is like how interesting the earthbending architecture is, because they don't have seams. Like when they're building their things, they're building it completely out of thin air, basically. They're thin earth.
Yeah.
And the kind of concept that you could have in a world where magic is more abundant is, what does it take to make a window? Like, we have glass blowers who do all kinds of interesting things with glass in this world, but like, if you could just superheat a sheet of sand in place, how much easier is it to make a window in the Tellest universe?
Like in Minecraft.
Yeah, basically.
At what point does the magic become more like a replicator, like for certain things?
Right. So, like, did they just have someone come out and put together... Maybe that's why Wesley learned magic. Maybe he watched people doing quote-unquote mundane utility things and went, oh, well, I could try and do that, and then all of a sudden was able to do something. You had mentioned earlier, like, maybe his mother was sweeping in the house and he wizard's apprentice and
broom.
Yeah, and did something like that, and the mom was like, what
And then would somebody be, like, if somebody lived their entire life normally, like, as a non-magical person. And then somebody comes along and is like, or their child comes along and is like, I can make this easy and instant for you. Would they be receptive to that, or would they be like, no, like, this is where I assign my value?
Right,
like,
right. I find myself, losing some of what makes me me if I can't do these tasks.
Like, if the father was, like, a lumberjack or something, and the son's like, oh, I could do that instantly, would he be like, well, that's the trade that I worked for my entire life, and you're doing it instantly?
Yeah, you've trivialized what I do.
Right. Like how old people feel about emails when they go to write letters.
Now, so we talked about it. This is the millennials that we're talking about, right? This is the Tellest version of it. One of these parents is so overjoyed with their special baby that they can do no wrong. Which one is it? Is it Eleanor? Eleanor, or is it
Albert?
Is it Albert?
Albert.
Is it Adam and Eve? Is that why you chose A&E?
No, but decent. I mean, that's a good idea, really. I would say the father's probably more excited, and I'm gonna say it's for, like, the boy is going to create a new generation of magic folk. like how some dads would do, I think. Like, maybe that's the thing. And so we talked about this too. Like, would Tellest have the same kind of domesticity expectations that, like, a medieval Europe would have, where it was like the woman's the homemaker and make sure, like, the domicile is all secured and that's all they do? Or would she go out and have, like, her own? I would imagine so. I would imagine she goes out, she's got, like, her little girls group where they weave tapestries or something. They chit-chat about things.
We talked about a couple of other things too, like whether or not the people in this area can read and stuff like that. And considering the proximity to the Great Library and things like that, there's a good chance. Yeah, there's a good chance that there's a level of reading ability that a lot of these people have. So I could see the weaving group, and then somebody in the group is taking off that day and is reading a book to everyone while they're doing the work.
That's cute. Yeah, I would imagine that in this fantasy world with magic as a proximity, they're not, like, confined to the same situation that I feel like we find ourselves in. Like, there's so many concerns about, like, what are we going to do when we're older? What are we going to do for money constantly? Like, I'm sure those problems exist, but, like, do they worry about the stock market? Do they worry about, like, how bad are their taxes on, like, a poor year? Are they going to get kicked out of their homes? Like, or is that home theirs because they freaking built it? Like,
right. Yeah, there's a lot of problems that we have to kind of, like, suss out with, like, the theorizing, because you and I have this very, like, let's try and live life like Star Trek kind of way. Like, we're trying to get to that utopia. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what Atalatha represents in a lot of ways. But that's the dream, but is that reality?
Right.
Like, to your point, like, do they suffer from the same things that we all suffer from? And I think to some extent,
plus dragons,
plus
necromancers, like.
Well, and that's another episode entirely, is necromancy, because we don't know necessarily, like, you and I have talked about it. Just because it happens doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. Right. There's an entire culture of people in the Ancestor Festival that we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago, who, if you were a necromancer, they would be like revered almost. It would be, all right, like, you're doing something magical to bring life back to people who've left.
Right.
They don't necessarily have to be the people they were, but, like, there's some kind of, like, pageantry to the
And if that were the case, would would people who have access to necromancers even mourn a death? Or would they be like, cool, you get to be free of the burden of a pox upon you or something? Like,
well, we'll loop back into that, because that's an episode all to itself. But bringing things back into what we have here, I mean, we're talking about magic, and we're talking about, possibly what the child has access to, but what about, like, the resources that this suburban Thistleton has to connect it to Atalatha? Like, we talked about how, the who is it? Is it Wesley, he is going to probably end up going to the academy. And I don't remember in the academy episode, when do people start going? At what age? Like, he's 7 years old? Seven?
Yeah.
Is he old enough to go to the academy, or is there almost like elementary school versions of the academy that like kind of...
I'm gonna say they have a kinder academy.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say that they have like, because I would tantrum. I would imagine that they, as a place that's for a school of learning, but also like a risk assessment institution, they would not want to delay having like a child learn like to control their powers,
right?
Because I would imagine like the younger they are, the more dangerous they are if they have a power that
if it's unchecked,
right? Like if you're crying because you're hungry or something and then accidentally like, you know, turn your mom into bread, that would be a problem.
It would.
So
it would.
Like we also talked about,
it's a mini Professor Xavier's School for the Gifted,
right? And then we also talked about, like, so they have, like, dormitories on site, but I would imagine that a young child wouldn't have a dorm in the way that, like, the older kids would, where they're, like, away at college almost.
Right, yeah. Harry Potter started a little young, but I think that's a little bit unreasonable to expect. I mean, for most families, right? Like, you're not going to try and take a child away from their family if the opportunity is there to keep what makes that person feel safe, you know? So,
and I imagine like a 30 to, let's say, 30 minutes to get into the city and 30 minutes to get them into the classroom. An hour there and back stinks, like, as a commute. But at the same time, with, like, I don't imagine that Atalathans have a 9 to 5 typical workday. It's, you know, whatever your job is, you do your job in the time that you can, and then you live the rest of your life.
Right. And a lot of, I would imagine, what you see in Atalatha, you're going to have people who have bosses and stuff like that. Yeah. But a lot of times you might not, and especially like in the suburban, you know, lifestyle. You might be on your own, you know, raising livestock, making equipment, making, you know, goods to sell and barter and stuff like that. The hope is that, you know, there's plenty of people who are trying to do their best to provide food for everybody so that there is nobody going hungry.
Right.
I mean, there's probably slums that, you know, are not well taken care of or anything like that. Atalatha is not like a you know, 10-mile big city. It's, you know, 100 miles more. Right. It's a tremendously big city. So
when we talk about slums in a fantasy city, we're typically talking about the ones who are on like the literal SHIT side of town. So like we were talking about the home, the bathroom situation. Like what do we have here? Is it medieval village style where you've got like a hole? Do you have like an aqueduct?
So we were talking like in the city proper, within the walls of the city, I would say that maybe around like, we'll say 2/3, we'll say 66% of the city has some kind of more modernized plumbing situation. Maybe not plumbing the way that we know it, but probably like a step further than, you know, like the little, what we saw Tywin Lannister doing in Game of Thrones. You know, where he's crapping in a box, and that's likely going into the side of the castle and falling down into the streets below.
And then you've got the
shit shovelers. Which Albert could be.
Albert could be. We're not gonna diss a you know, a man who provides a good service.
Yep.
And then the question is like, okay, so if that's the amenities that we can expect, let's say they do have sort of like let's say they have a mini aqueduct system, because they are like around like rivers and stuff like that. There's got to be something like set up to where it's reasonable.
Right. And you could figure like if there is a concept of, hey, we know that sanitation is important for health.
Right.
We're not living in Atla, you know, it's not the Avatar: The Last Airbender universe, but there are people who have the abilities akin to earthbending and stuff like that. It's not completely unreasonable to say that they could have underground plumbing. We know in Versailles Varai there's the sewers. Like we've got the actual sewers that you guys have been in for the D&D experiences. And Versailles Varai is not Atalatha. Versailles Varai is a big city, and it's somewhat modernized, but it kind of has like
market
that
shantytown kind of thing.
So you would figure Atalatha probably has a lot more robust system. We've been kind of saying it's sort of like Philadelphia because of our proximity to that city, but to me it almost feels more like New York, or like maybe an in-between. Like we've talked about like the gunpowder age and how close we are to that. We're probably not too far off from like the equivalent of a subway or something like that, like underground travel through the city to make things faster,
or like the creatures, like the worms. Thing like that could really, like
in D. April's Fools.
That could theoretically take the place of like a train or something.
You could have something like that. You could have something that maybe isn't as phasey. There's so many creatures in the Tellest universe, and obviously the ones that we don't even know about as creators. As utility, we could make one up like that, and it would make sense.
One thing I want to mention is we talked about like refrigeration, like how they keep their food cold, and you said Everice is something that's readily available to people,
I think,
or is it
so at least at the point where we were writing the Tinker's Tale, that was where we first introduced the idea, and he had gotten it from, if I'm not mistaken, Androckitus. So Maximus was trying to preserve the corpse of a horse that he quote unquote rescued off the ground because he was using the horse for research, and he was doing it to get kind of like the anatomy of a horse correct, so that when he was building his clockwork horse, he had a representative sample that he could use that wasn't, he wanted to be able to kind of dissect it.
Like Leonardo da Vinci did.
Essentially.
Yeah, to make his Vitruvian Man and all that.
Yep. So he had gotten it from Androckitus. Now Androckitus was like the lead wizard in a city with very little wizardry at the time, and it's grown exponentially over the years. So there's probably at this point a way to expand the access to something like that.
But it might be like a pricier luxury because you have to like have it mined and then imported. But the fact that like a specialty mineral exists, like a specialty creature for utility exists, like you could have stones that heat the home, like so that you don't need to just have a fire going all the time or something.
And we had seen like obviously the ability to freeze your goods or at least keep them cold and more preserved is not a fantasy only situation. Like we've had refrigerated cellars and stuff for thousands of years, hundreds of years at the very least. We were looking at a video the other day about like the ice cave. So it's not unreasonable to think that maybe like Everice is like the be all end all, like that's the Freon of the Tellest universe. But there's very likely something that's like you said, a mineral or a stone that keeps things a little closer to that at a much more affordable cost. You would have some kind of little like root cellar that maybe you lined with this that someone in suburbia could afford.
So we can see in this picture we have like candles lining the floor. Why are they on the floor? I just realized. I like it, but weird.
Because they're posing for a picture.
They want to illuminate their cool boots. But we also have, like, in various art, we have a combination of, like, braziers. I have no idea how to pronounce it. I've only read it in books. We have, so, like, some sort of oil burning, like, lantern kind of thing. We've got candles, obviously. We have, like, sort of chandeliers. We've seen chandeliers in the art as well. What does it... There's a chandelier.
And back there.
Yeah, there's more in the...
Chandelier.
Stop it.
I won't.
He tickled me.
Anyway, there's...
That we have... So that's, like, sort of the lighting of the world. We've got the amenities pretty much figured out.
And we had in our D&D campaign, we had like each of you guys really quickly got like a candle that would never go out, right? Like it was, or like you could summon the light back to it. It was basically like an ever burning candle,
right?
And it was like the wick never burned down or anything like that. So there's probably access to things like that, because you guys didn't spend any like tremendous amount of money or things like that. There's also like for adventurers, there's other like alternatives. Like we have, let me see if I have it in the art gallery. I don't know if I put yeah, there we go, the Sunstone, which there's a ton of different varieties of this. There's the ones that will like float and follow. There's the ones that you would just kind of like throw into a room and use as like a flash grenade.
Right.
So there's a lot of utility to the way that we achieve the same things in the Tellest universe as we do in real life.
Right. How about healthcare? Like how access to medicine and things like that. I would imagine close to the city you have your pick of like healers.
Yeah, there'd be clerics and things like that.
But what is like typical village, like if there's an emergency, you don't have an do you have an do you have a village healer per area? Like what do we do here?
I would say that for the most part, you've probably got like someone who like kind of serves as like an herbalist, an apothecary, stuff like that. Like they know like you know the healing salves like Mom used to make. You know, like that's the people who are not exactly tuned into like the gods or anything like that and have that kind of spiritual connection, but like they do know like the recipes that might be able to help you before you get to that step where you need to go to the quote-unquote hospital.
Right.
You know, before you need to go to the temple and look for one of the clerics or something like that.
So for the clerics and stuff, would that access be, free, obviously, for people? And then would something more like a specialty salve for a chronic issue be something that costs you?
I would imagine that, like, technically nothing is free when it comes to the gods, right? Like, because you've got to think...
you have to, like, trade
You're tithing to some extent. And it's just kind of what's expected. You know, it's not necessarily...
like a rule.
Right. Like, no one's gonna, like, lord over you, like, well, you gotta pay. I mean,
someone's
not
standing
in
there,
Atalatha, anyway.
Someone's standing there waiting for a tip. Like,
right.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
You definitely get it. You know, we're talking about, some of these characters, like Maximus, and his story was friends with Richard Lenner, who the entirety of the temple that he worked with before he was excommunicated became really corrupt and like manufactured a disease that they could benefit off of and profit off of. And I think Atalatha is probably the opposite. You know, like, yes, they need money to help keep the church afloat and everything, but they're not bilking anybody. They're just saying like, hey, the gods speak through me. Give a little bit back. Like,
let us keep the candles on.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to talk about with like an average home is the type of entertainment that you might find in that home. So we talked about books or somebody reading a book to a group, which is very like,
community based and
18th century England kind of style, but with access to magic, would they have anything similar to like a record player, or would they have puppetry? Like, what kind of in-home entertainment would like a typical family have to sit around and talk by the fireplace? So
I'm stricken by this idea that, like, to some extent, like, magic almost is like programming. Like, to some extent, like, you don't have a box of electricity that is, creating TV. It's not a computer or anything like that. But, like, it's almost like you're plucking the strings of like this otherworldly presence, and maybe you can quote unquote program it to behave the same way over and over again. So while you might not have a record player, who's to say that you can't basically create the equivalent of like one of those player pianos,
or like a music box,
with like a lute or something like that, where like, someone has quote unquote programmed this lute to be able to play the same tune over and over again. Right. It's legitimately like plucking the strings, but without the need for anybody grabbing it or anything like that. Right. So you might be like, oh, let me get that lute out that plays that one specific song that I like, or something along those lines.
I like it. What about, oh, she's gonna get yelled at. Our doggy is sniffing at the little doggy. Our big doggy sniffing
Kev
at the little
says,
doggy.
fantasy Spotify.
Fantasy, yeah, exactly. That's kind of the idea. Let's talk about Duke of Barconia. Like, what do the pets of Tellest
do for fun?
Yeah, well, no, not do for fun. But, like, so we established that this family in particular is not necessarily, like, a rural family. So the dog wouldn't happen to have, like, an exact, like, herding function or anything.
Right. I would imagine that the Duke of Barconia is most likely a companion dog, not a worker dog.
Right. So if the dad's going to work and the mom's going to work, what's the doggy doing all day? Is he in the house? Is he free to roam? What are the pet ownership laws of Tellest, if any? Do they need to be registered or licensed?
I don't believe that's the case, right? Like at this point in the Tellest universe, it's a little less, or at least in Atalatha, it's we're not going to lord over you too much. It's a little bit more libertarian, and it's we don't want to be bothered with the minutia of that kind of stuff. Right. So we're gonna let your dog chew on their foot as much as they want. I would assume that at least for Albert and Eleanor, what they do is he's not a worker dog, but he is left at home to protect the homestead.
I like that. He protects the chickens and.
Well, if they have livestock, if he's representative of every dog, that might be their job. But in this case, since I don't think that they do have, they might. But I think because we kind of talked about like them both having like out of the house jobs,
right.
They're having the dog there to protect from intruders. That's the dog's job. And it same way as ours. Like she's not gonna eat you, but she might.
But she's not gonna, but she might.
She might. But people out in the world, they don't know that. So
right.
Just the presence of an animal.
Will protect the house. Right. I like that. That's a good function for Duke.
Right, and maybe once Wesley learned that he had these magical abilities, maybe he has some kind of evocation magic where he changes Duke. What kind of dog is Duke?
Let's say a sheepdog-esque.
Okay. When they leave the house, he casts a magic spell on Duke that makes him bark much deeper and louder.
I like it.
So.
It's a really big bark. Okay, so we have Norma, the daughter. She's still in school, right? High school.
Right, because we're assuming it might not be 12 grades or anything like that, but like the idea is that you're learning until you're old enough to have moved on.
Right.
There's likely, we have the Magic Academy. There's probably like a post-learning academy of some sorts as well. But I think Norma is just, she's normal. She's not gifted or anything like that. She wasn't supposed to be.
She's not very good at weaving.
Right.
She might be like, her expectation might be like a lady's maid or something like that. Like she's not really good at most things. So what does that look like for a regular person of Tellest? Like if you just have no real ambition, you just kind of want to futter through life, like.
Yeah, honestly, Atalatha is probably pretty safe because you have the ability to say, I'm not good at this, let me try something else. I'm not good at this, let me try something else. And a lot of places, you probably don't have that flexibility.
Right.
It's probably, you're going to hang out with this person and you're going to learn how to do their job well. And if you don't, there's a chance that person says you're a witch and they try and burn you. Like,
that's true.
There is historically in the real world, there's not a lot of ways for people to find a better way out. If someone didn't like you, they manufactured something against you,
right,
and it became very dangerous for you.
Still is that way.
Well, yes, not quite as bad as it was in the 1600s or so.
As Witch Bernie, but you know. And then we have a interesting sort of dynamic, like if the eldest child. So let's.
Here, I will say this: if Norma's situation didn't improve and she found herself in roles that she didn't like, there's a good chance that she starts off, kind of jealous of her brother, not supporting him or anything like that. She could be put into the position where, all right, we're taking you out of school. You're not good at it. You're likely not going to be good at much else, but we're going to have you be the chaperone for your brother. So all of a sudden, she becomes the guardian for this person who has these abilities.
But then she can go walk around the city and try and learn something herself.
She might have opportunities that weren't available to her either.
We just fixed their problem. That's beautiful.
No, so.
I was gonna say, so we have. Whoa! What you doing? Don't you do that. What does the mental health look like in Tellest? Do they have therapy? Because a lot of us need therapy. Or do they have, like, potions that'll calm you down? And do people imbibe too much sometimes?
Well, I mean, I would imagine that, we never really talked about it, but there's very likely magical versions of spirits, not ghosts, spirits and drinks and stuff like that.
Leaf has clearly slowed your mind.
There's very likely we treat a lot of bartenders in the real world as therapists to some extent. What better way to get the therapy that you want than to get an ear that will listen to you while you're getting treated with something that might not be as... It's not just alcohol. Like, there's something else. There's some other proponent to it that might have some kind of... And to some extent, it could be physically healing as well. So, like, hey, I'm not going to go to the cleric. I'm going to go to the tavern where they sell this very specific concoction.
I like that idea of a tavern not necessarily being a place for just drunkards. Like, it's a place of a lot of possibilities. You could have like people who, like you said, like need to talk things out, they need to heal, they need to just connect with people, or they could have like their version of an upper so that they can go party all night, like whatever their situation is. That's a little less like miserable man going, I'm going to go to the bar after work to forget everything. A little bit nicer.
I'm going to drink to remember.
But I do think that that's a, the community-based kind of thing would be prevalent in this world, because you don't really have the option to, like, isolate yourself if you're that close to a huge, huge city, unless you're, like, a outskirts witch, which I'm sure exists.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plenty of them. But the interesting thing is that you have choice,
Yeah, absolutely. We've been what-ifing a lot of these choices throughout the episode today. Mm-hmm. What other ideas do you want to talk about for this family before we put a pin in it, and we'll wrap up the episode and maybe come back to either this family for a part 2 or to explore other families in the Tellest universe in a future episode?
Well, let's consider like a little bit of the institution of marriage. Like, let's say that it's a husband and wife who have 2 kids. What does that marriage look like? Is that like a legal or spiritual ceremony? Do you have to...
So I don't think that it's going to be built the same way that like a United States marriage is. It's not... There's nothing to do with taxes or anything like that. Like there's no financial benefit to it. It is most likely...
You get a dowry from the lady, like how medieval times was.
I don't believe so, at least in this point in the Tellest universe, because I feel like for the most part, your peasants and the like, they're not marrying for power or anything like that. Kev says, "Don't look to the south."
Fair.
So it's not about position or anything like that. At least in Atalatha, I think that for the most part, well, I mean, there's always politics to everything. But I would imagine that it's very likely to be based around religion, right? Like, you've got the goddess of love. There's likely some kind of concept about, like, you're doing it in the light of, what she represents.
Right. So that's where the wife and husband kind of aspect come from. Are we keeping the idea of the male surname being like the standard for the woman to take, or in Tellest is it kind of optional? Like, maybe if it's an interspecies marriage or something, they have different institutions.
I don't know, because it might be like a product of a bygone era, right? Because you figure, at least in a lot of, the whole concept of it is man is stronger, woman take man name, right? Like, that's the dumb caveman aspect of it. And it might just be because we're coming at it from that perspective that it's an artifact of how life used to be. It might be on the way to changing, similar to how it is in our world, where more women are standing up for themselves and saying, no, I'm not going to change my name. It's been my name. Why would I change it?
It depends on whether or not you like your last name, to be honest.
Right,
That's a big thing.
Right, and I think the game changer, Kev says, can Kaja marry humans? I think it depends on what part of the world you're in.
Of course.
I think in Atalatha, I think at this point they're probably, maybe not completely welcoming of it, but they would be, it would,
It's a multicultural city.
Right.
Like the general consensus is, like, when you come here, you can expect to be safe, because they have, like, as a general rule, like when you go to Philly or New York, you expect, or like Los Angeles, you expect like a certain level of liberalism. So I would imagine it would be somewhat similar in Atalatha.
Right.
Like, you're always going to have your people who are
right. Yeah. I mean, you'd have to deal with whatever bigotry and racism and stuff like that.
Right.
You also have the concept of would there be a possibility of any progeny, and I don't know what that looks like in the Tellest universe.
We did talk about that, I think. Like, we talked about...
I know, like, humans, elves, dwarves, gnomes, they can produce offspring.
But when
it was like a 1 in 1,000 chance compared to...
Right, like when the anthropomorph species start, like if a Logano and a Rhinotaur wanted to have a kid, would it be a monster, or would it be, like, some sort of hybrid? And is there, like, what's the chance, basically, of not only having a kid, but it being of sound mind and body at that point.
We ended up getting tossed into that, and I think
that's a whole episode.
Right. I got to reel it back, and I don't know if we'll find it again. Where were we at before I spoke out what Kev said?
Marriage, the last names.
Oh yeah. So the whole concept is, again, it was a matter of, on a physical hierarchy, the men are going to be more powerful. Right. But in this world, you don't necessarily have that with things like the strain and magic.
Yeah, you have magic. Like, magical people are more powerful than non-magical folks. So would that influence sort of the
If you are, depending on geography, is it the rule that someone with the strain is the one who carries the name? Like, you look to the dwarves in the Tellest universe, and they literally start a clan if they're found to have the strain.
What if we do a situation where, like, it's kind of not like a rule, but sort of the expectation that whoever has the more affluence, like, or prestige to their name is the one who gets the surname.
So like if you were a family, and my family's more prestigious than yours.
If Alicia Main decided to marry, like, a Joe Schmo, would she be an Alicia Schmo, or would he be Joe Main? What I mean?
Right. Because at this point, I don't think that Elton would be like, yeah, just get rid of your name. However, again, Maybe she hates her name.
Maybe she does. So I think what we like kind of circled around and landed on is there's not a standard.
Right.
You have the choice. Right. I do think it makes more sense, especially in I would imagine that Atalatha is not necessarily capitalist. It's probably more of a meritocracy, just because of like, you know, the nobility is not just about how much money you have, but like your valor, like the Knights of Valor and like
virtue.
Your Knights of Virtue, like your stories that you told. If you're an athlete, like
in the Tower Sphere, or whatever.
If you're a Tower Sphere competitor, Albert is a Tower Sphere fan.
He's a Firebirds fan.
Yeah, he's a Firebird. Go Birds. That's canon. That's absolutely what's going on for this family. Mm-hmm. And Albert's a little disappointed that Wesley isn't like super into this Firebirds, but he now hopes that Wesley will become a Tower Sphere competitor one day.
Yep, he absolutely could.
Giving him all his little gear and like little outfits. Mm-hmm. I love that. And he asked his wife to loom him a flag so he can wave it in the stands.
Yeah, weave me a Firebirds tapestry that I can
wave in the stadium in our next game.
Here we go.
I love that. That's so cute.
All right. Do we want to put a pin in this for now, and we'll wrap the episode up? But we'll, you know, again, we can come back to the Everleys later, and we can also look at other families throughout the Tellest universe and figure out what's going on as well. But,
sounds good.
Let's go to our show closing page. So, folks, on the screen right now, you should see all the places that you can find Tellest out there on the internet. Tellest.com is a great first place to look. We've been looking at the art gallery on the website today, but there's plenty of other things to see there. So definitely give that a look. We've got a couple of premium sites where you can go to find some of our map products. Patreon.com/Tellest, battlemapfantasy.com, and Tellest.etsy.com are great places that you can look for that. And you can also see a lot of the Weird Witches stuff on there as well.
That's me.
Hi, Doggy.
I'm not Doggy.
We are going to get more of Rhiannon's stuff on the Etsy store soon because she is on her way out at her day job and she's freeing up some time to do a lot of cool stuff. We've also got a couple of other places that you can see the content that Rhiannon creates. We've got 2 TikTok channels, at Tales of Tellest and at Weird Witch Wands. You want to talk about them at all? No, I just did. If you want to see videos like this after they have lived their lives on Twitch for the time being, you can go to youtube.com/@worldoftellest. But if you do want to see us live, chat with us like Kev did today, you want to go to twitch.tv/thattellestguy to chat with us live, get your channel points, all that kind of stuff. We got a lot of cool stuff that you can use those channel points on after we get 5 more followers. So definitely check us out.
I've got like 35,000 coins.
You're going to use some of those coins to donate to people on Quantum Quest to get them mana. But that's going to wrap us up for tonight. We are going to... This is one of our longer episodes.
I had fun talking about the Everleys.
Yeah. But we will be back next week. I will be back tomorrow and Wednesday to do some Incarnate maps. In the meantime, we'll miss you.